Outside a warehouse, a cyclist traveling at moderate speed collided with a forklift's elevated forks that were inserted into a cargo truck. His head struck the raised forks while his bike continued forward, causing him to fall to the ground. This incident clearly demonstrates the critical dangers of inadequate traffic separation between pedestrians, cyclists, and industrial vehicles in facility areas. Designated travel lanes must separate vehicle traffic from pedestrian and bicycle pathways with physical barriers or clear markings. At a grocery store loading dock, a forklift operator was in the process of getting off a cargo truck when the truck suddenly began moving forward. The forklift became wedged in the gap between the truck and the loading ramp, eventually falling to the ground. Fortunately, the operator recognized the danger and was able to jump out of the forklift. This incident clearly demonstrates the critical importance of vehicle restraint systems during loading and unloading operations. All trucks must have wheel chocks properly positioned and parking brakes engaged before any forklift enters or exits. Outside a chilled foods factory, a worker was manually loading supplies into a truck when a forklift operator transporting a tall stack of boxes drove into the same area. The excessive height of the stacked boxes completely obscured the forklift operator's forward visibility. Unable to see ahead, the operator continued driving and pinned the loading worker between the moving forklift and the stationary truck, crushing his leg. This incident clearly demonstrates the fatal dangers of obstructed visibility and inadequate pedestrian safety protocols around mobile equipment. Forklift operators must never drive with loads that obstruct their view and should travel in reverse when forward visibility is compromised. At a construction facility, a large dump truck suspended by an overhead crane was being guided by multiple ground workers. Suddenly, one lifting cable snapped, causing the truck to tip and crash down, crushing a worker positioned beneath it. This incident clearly demonstrates the fatal consequences of rigging failure and improper positioning under suspended loads. Workers must never position themselves beneath suspended equipment. On the second floor of a construction site, workers were pouring and laying cement when the entire floor structure suddenly collapsed catastrophically. As the concrete and formwork gave way, multiple workers fell with the debris, while others desperately clung to exposed rebar to prevent falling to the ground level below. This incident clearly demonstrates the catastrophic consequences of inadequate formwork design, premature loading, or structural failure during concrete placement. All formwork and shoring systems must be engineered, inspected, and approved before concrete pours begin. In an automotive repair shop, a mechanic raised a vehicle using a hydraulic lift when it began tipping dangerously to one side. The mechanic attempted to stabilize the falling car by grabbing a tire and using his body weight as a counterbalance. His grip failed, and he fell to the ground, with the vehicle collapsing directly on top of him. Co-workers immediately responded and attempted to lift the car off the trapped mechanic. This incident clearly demonstrates the fatal dangers of improperly balanced vehicle lifts and attempting to manually stabilize falling loads. Vehicles must be positioned on the correct lift points, according to manufacturer specifications, before raising. At a construction site, a worker was using an overhead crane to transport a metal beam at a low height. As he positioned himself to guide the beam into place, the lifting cable suddenly snapped, and the heavy beam fell directly onto his feet, crushing them. The injured worker immediately began jumping up and down in severe pain from the traumatic injury to his feet. This incident clearly demonstrates the critical dangers of positioning yourself beneath or adjacent to suspended loads and the consequences of rigging equipment failure. In an air conditioning facility parking lot, two workers were conversing when a large water storage tank behind them suddenly burst open. The tank released a massive volume of brown water under high pressure, creating a powerful wave that swept both workers off their feet and carried them across the area. This incident clearly demonstrates the dangers of pressurized vessel failures and inadequate inspection of storage tanks. All pressure vessels and water tanks must undergo regular inspections for corrosion, structural integrity, cracks, and weakening. At a snowy construction supplies facility, a thick metal beam was being lifted by crane cables onto a delivery truck. As the beam was positioned over the truck bed, the cable hooks began snapping one after another. The heavy beam fell onto the truck, then bounced violently off the surface. The tremendous impact force destroyed the truck's side panels and launched one worker who was positioned near the truck into the air from the collision. This incident clearly demonstrates the catastrophic consequences of rigging equipment failure and inadequate exclusion zones during lifting operations. In a manufacturing plant, a worker was arranging materials on a conveyor belt when a forklift operator approached from behind carrying large wooden boxes. The operator positioned the load improperly, causing the stacked boxes to slide off the forks. The boxes fell and pinned the worker against the conveyor belt, trapping him between the heavy cargo and the equipment. Co-workers immediately rushed to assist and worked to remove the boxes and free the trapped worker. This incident clearly demonstrates the dangers of inadequate spatial awareness, improper load placement, and insufficient communication between equipment operators and ground personnel. In a metalworking facility, a worker was smoking a cigarette while working on metal sheets near a large suspended metal fixture hanging overhead. The chains supporting the heavy contraption suddenly failed, causing it to fall directly onto the worker's hands, crushing and breaking them. This incident clearly demonstrates multiple serious safety violations, including smoking in industrial areas, inadequate rigging inspection, and positioning beneath suspended equipment. Smoking is typically prohibited in manufacturing facilities due to fire and explosion hazards and represents a distraction from work tasks. All chains, cables, and rigging supporting overhead equipment must undergo regular inspection for wear, corrosion, elongation, and damage. In a fabric manufacturing facility, a worker operating a warping machine became momentarily distracted and leaned too close to the equipment. The powerful rotating mechanisms caught him and pulled his head and torso into the machinery, causing catastrophic entanglement and crushing injuries. This incident clearly demonstrates the fatal consequences of momentary distraction around high-speed textile machinery and inadequate machine guarding. All warping machines and textile equipment with rotating drums, spindles, or moving parts must have physical guards preventing body contact with dangerous zones. At a tire vulcanizing shop, a worker was servicing a car's rear tires while positioned at the back bumper. Directly behind him, a truck was parked with its front cabin tilted forward in a raised maintenance position. Without warning, the raised truck cabin suddenly released and tipped fully with tremendous force, crushing the man and the rear section of his car. This incident clearly demonstrates the catastrophic dangers of improperly secured raised components and inadequate spatial awareness in maintenance facilities. All raised truck cabs, hoods, dump beds, and tilting components must be locked with safety props or hydraulic supports before anyone works nearby. At a construction site, a worker positioned on an elevated balcony casually threw wooden planks directly down to the ground level below. It struck a co-worker on the head hard. Fortunately, the struck worker was wearing a hard hat which absorbed the impact and prevented what could have been a fatal head injury. This incident clearly demonstrates the dangers of dropping materials from height and inadequate material handling protocols on multi-level construction sites. Materials must never be thrown or dropped from elevated positions.